Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I welcome you to a webinar, a combined hybrid event on hydropower development, providing renewable and environmentally friendly energy, ensuring long-term water availability, and preventing water-related natural disasters. We have a wonderful panel of experts lined up here for this afternoon. To start with, I would introduce myself. I'm Tom Howes from the International Energy Agency, and I'll be moderating today's event. I should flag up that we are, this is a live streamed event and fully recorded, just so you're aware. And I'd like to thank the co-organizers. The IEA is co-organizing this with the International Hydropower Association, together with the government of Tajikistan. We have an excellent panel of speakers to have a good discussion about the different aspects of developing hydropower, the role hydropower can play in addressing the climate challenge, and the issues involved in developing hydropower in a sustainable and environmentally safe fashion. So today's webinar will have three opening speeches, and after that we'll have a panel of experts to dive into some of the more detailed aspects of developing hydropower. Building on two presentations we will have between those, presentations outlining both IEA and Alex Campbell's great expertise on the different issues of hydropower. So without further ado, we jump in, and I turn with great pleasure to introduce His Excellency, Mr. Jamshed Shoimzoda, who's Minister from Kazakhstan. Tajikistan, please, over to you.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Tom. Dear participants of this side event, ladies and gentlemen, let me first of all, on behalf of Tajik delegation, welcome all of you, including online participants, to this event. I would like also to thank to our colleagues from International Agency and the International Hydropower Association, who together with us organize this important event. Hydropower is undoubtedly one of the major renewable and the clean energy that can make significant contribution to the climate resilient agenda. It will also make a worthy contribution to addressing issues such as water security and water-related disaster risk reduction. I'm convinced that today's event will provide an opportunity to discuss important issues related to the development of hydropower in the context of the global climate change and work out feasible recommendation. Dear colleagues, the Republic of Tajikistan has defined it as a main direction for the development of the green economy. The core of which is the development of the country's rich hydro potential, which currently developed by just only 3%. Just imagine that we have just only developed 3–4%, and at the same time we are 95% generating all our energy comes from hydro energy. According to these indicators, Tajikistan is among the six leading countries in the term of the share of renewable energy source in the total volume of electricity production. The annual capacity of Tajikistan is 527 billion kilowatt-hour in a year, which can cover 3 times current needs of the Central Asia region. This enormous potential was the development of which could covering the growing needs not only for Tajikistan and Central Asia countries as a whole, but the neighbor states as well. In the context of awarding making to reference to the CASA 1000 project, which we connected to power system, power grid of the Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan with the power system of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and exporting more than 1,300 megawatts of the environment-friendly, economically acceptable accessible to these energy deficit regions. This unique regional project will be contribute not only for the social economic development for the participant countries, but also ensures environmental sustainability. Undoubtedly, without the energy, people will have to use other source of needs, especially in the Afghanistan and Pakistan, to meet your energy needs. And if this project will be not implemented, if the needed volume of electricity will be produced by power plants using coal or fuel oil, then only the annual volume of emission into the atmosphere will be equal to 200,000 tons. And they should burn minimum 5.1 million coals in this time. It should be noted that the complementation of another very important project in Tajikistan, Ragun Hydropower Station, which are now under construction, with a total installed capacity more than 3,600 megawatts in Tajikistan, will make a significant contribution in this process. At the same time, we continue to work restoring the parallel working operation, our energy system in other region, and we are on the way to establish the regional electricity market. We believe that consumption of such work will bring enormous benefits to all countries in the region. This is a so-called win-win approach, when countries could receive clean energy, save fossil fuels, reduce emission, and provide more renewable regulation of river flows, which becomes extremely important in conditions of the climate change. Dear participants, hydropower is not only generation of clean electricity, but also effective and integrated management of the river water resources through the reservoirs. Taking into account the negative impact of the climate change on the water resource, Tajikistan possesses more than 60% of the glass in Central Asia. About 60% of the region water resources are formed in our territory. As a result of climate change, glaciers are melting, the hydrological cycle is changing, the water-related disasters are increasing. Hydropower reservoirs play an important role in achieving resilience. They provide renewable flow regulations that allows water to be used at the right time, in the right amount, and for the long term, which significantly mitigates the impact of droughts and low water levels, which have become more frequent over the past decade. The reservoirs also help to reduce the risk of mud flow and floods, which have also increasing in frequency due to the accelerated melting of the glaciers. Taking into account the mutual interesting integration and rational use of water and energy resources, the head of Central Asia countries, in her statement in 2018, highlighted the importance of the hydropower facilities under the construction on transborder watercourses, taking into account the interests, of course, all countries of the region. Hydropower can also make a significant contribution to global trends towards a climate-resilient agenda, including the more ambitious net zero target to limit temperature rise to below 1.5. It's my pleasure mentioning that the Hydropower 2050 identifies the next 850 plus GW total towards 2050 report says that more than 1,200 gigawatt of additional hydropower capacity will be needed for the reach to this target. I'm convinced that it will be serve a good intensive for the future development of hydropower, making a strong contribution in solving social economic problems, environmental and climate sustainability, and sustainable development in general. Just imagine, yesterday in the high-level panel was mentioning the very interesting figures. It was mentioning that all climate issue, any problem with the climate brings 80% depend on the water. It means that the flood will be increased, everything will be under control, and that's why hydropower with a good reservoir, with of course following all necessary instruction, it's one of the key tools to how we can mitigate the issues of the climate change. At the same time, cover the needs globally, locally, and country needs for the energy, and cover our demands also. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I think I'm particularly impressed by the role that hydropower plays as a regional balancing tool. It's it's one of the many uses of hydropower. So please, next, turning to our next speaker, I turn to Mr. Eddie Rich, Chief Executive Officer of the International Hydropower Association.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, everyone. I want to start off by congratulating the Water Pavilion, because you're presenting some really interesting, yes, you're presenting some really interesting balanced discussions. I don't know how many of you were here for the last session, but this is quite a good balance to that, because there was a deep concern expressed about new dams. And of course, I'm going to say something quite shocking for a CEO of the International Hydropower Association, but I'll be quite happy for no dams ever to be built again. But I don't think that's actually an option. That's not actually the reality that we're facing, as I think the Deputy Minister expressed so well. I mean, if he's only going to use the 3% of his water power capacity, where does it leave Tajikistan as a country? Where does it leave the Tajik people? So there is that imperative from just a base load point of view. And there's three reasons. So that's the first one, it's the base load need for energy. The second one is that balance, which again, Deputy Minister, you referred to, right? This is the ignored crisis within the crisis. If we're going to get a lot more wind and a lot more solar on the system, and we all want that, I certainly do, then we need something to back it up. And you've got three choices. You can either have blackouts, you can have gas, fossil fuel backup, or you can have hydropower. These are the options available right now. Maybe some others will come along, and that would be great. But those are the options right now, so we're going to need it for that. And thirdly, we're going to need it. Climate change. Again, Deputy Minister referred to this. With much more volatile river activity, we're going to need to manage those waterways. We're going to need more water management for flood control, for drought control, for irrigation. And if you're building that anyway, why don't you power it? Why don't you take some clean power? So there are three strong, and I'm afraid, undeniable reasons why we do need to have more hydropower. And that's why the IEA and IRENA are both saying in the next 30 years, we've got to build the same, if not more, hydropower than we have built in the last 100 years. So my colleague Alex Campbell, our head of policy, will in a moment explain a little bit about the policies that are required for that and what's in the pipeline. But I just want to say, if I may, Tom, just one minute more on the third element, which is sustainability. We must do this sustainably. We haven't always been the best at that, but we have learned, right? We're the granddaddy of the renewables. We've been through the mistakes. Hopefully, we've got a lot to tell the world. And what we've done is, alongside governments, alongside civil society, conservation and social NGOs, and international banks, developed through a multi-stakeholder process, a set of hydropower sustainability tools, which has now been turned into a standard, right? And that's an agreed standard. It's not our standard. It's not the industry's standard. It's a shared standard. It's not assessed by us. It's assessed independently. It is not us marking our homework. So that is the international standard for whether or not these new projects can meet good practice and indeed best practice in sustainability. And also we've made other commitments not to do new dams in World Heritage sites, and if we're in protected areas, to must apply the standard to at least good practice. So my colleague will say a little bit more about how we're going to do all of that, but I hope that you see that we're not actually in a position of much choice here. We have to go ahead. Let's do it properly. Let's do it right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eddie. There we are, the inevitability of ongoing development of hydropower. Next, I turn to our third speaker, Ms. Maria Antonia Guin, who's Councillor of Itaipu Binacional in Paraguay. Please.
Thank you very much. In 1973, Paraguay and Brazil jointly ventured into creating Itaipu in order to use their shared international river to produce hydropower. At the time, it was one of its kind. Who would have thought that by today, it would have become one of the major producers of clean and renewable energy in the world, reaching the mark of 2.8 billion megawatts hour of energy produced since it started operating. However, adverse environmental effects caused by wildfires, droughts, and more generally, the impact of climate change has brought about the worst hydrological crisis in the history of the whole South American region. Still, there is hope. Countries in the region have turned into international cooperation to face this crisis together. For example, in the last couple of years, the riparian countries, Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina, form an intergovernmental technical committee in order to exchange hydrological data. This was a crucial precondition for the eventual decision to liberate sufficient water so as to not compromise the dam's energy production and integrity, and at the same time make sure that the multiple uses of the river by downstream countries were secured. Furthermore, Itaipu is aware that in order to take care of our valuable natural resource, our international river, environmental actions to support the surrounding ecosystem are absolutely crucial. Itaipu takes care of more than 100 hectares of territory that includes large natural reserves and forests. This helps avoid sediment development and maintain natural rain cycles. I also want to highlight the project Itaipu Preserva, one of the largest and most ambitious reforestation projects on the whole continent. Thus, Itaipu not only contributes to the fight against climate change by producing immense amounts of green energy, it also does so by reforestation and in a way that uses only species of plants and trees native to the area. This has the consequence of restoring part of the iconic Atlantic forest of Paraná. We work so that future generations, too, can enjoy this natural wonder of the world. And isn't this exactly what sustainable development means? Sustainable development signifies meeting our demands without compromising those of future generations. So, I will finish by saying that I truly believe that Itaipu surpassed the ideas of its creators, as it now significantly contributes to the sustainable development of the whole region. It is a global exemplar from the South, a paragon of international cooperation in the fight against climate change. Thank you very much.
What a wonderful example. Thank you very much indeed. So, with those wonderful introductory speeches, we thank you again. And you can change places with the panelists. And now we turn to two presentations. The first from my colleague who's joining us remotely from Paris, Mr. Jaime Bahar from the International Energy Agency. I think he's with us. We see him there, and the slide is there. So, Jaime, over to you.
Together this event. And I'm honored to join and present our recent work on hydropower here at the International Energy Agency. We basically looked at, in the last June, a promise that we gave a few years ago to the hydropower community by our executive director, indicating that hydropower does not get the attention that is needed compared to its role that is playing and that's supposed to play in the clean energy transitions. Based on this premise, IEA delivered a great study on hydropower's role today and basically hydropower's role in the coming 10 years and identified policy suggestions to all the policymakers. I'll go through some of the key messages of these, and I'd like to start with a reminder. When you open the news these days, you will only hear the news agencies or the Twitter talk about wind, solar PV, batteries, EVs, and all these great technologies that are being very popular. But unfortunately, we hear no word about hydropower, which actually today accounts for the majority of the low carbon electricity generation. Significantly higher than nuclear and actually higher than all renewable electricity sources combined. We called it as the forgotten giant of the electricity sector, not only because it generates so much clean energy, it also is among the largest provider of flexibility, which, as we all know, is extremely needed to integrate larger shares of wind and solar PV. However, when we talk about flexibility today, we prefer to talk about other storage capabilities, which I will come back to that in later slides. In addition to those two, hydropower is also critical to provide water management services and also water for agriculture and many other sectors for the livelihood of millions of people all around the world. However, hydropower development has been growing extremely well, but we expect this trend, unfortunately, to change in the coming decades. As you can see in the figure, the role of emerging economies in developing hydropower with their great potential has been around 90% over the last 3 decades, with China and Asia Pacific and Latin America taking a great role in developing the potential. Despite remaining potential that we see, we expect hydropower development to decline by more than 25% in the coming decade compared to last decade. Why is that? One of the reasons is because China's development is slowing down due to increasing costs and increasing challenges concerning social acceptance, but also in Latin America, where developing large-scale hydropower has become a big challenge. On the other hand, these declines are compensated by growth in Asia Pacific, especially in India and other Asia Pacific countries where the potential remains, but also in Africa, where hydropower provides a cost-effective electricity to increase the energy access in millions, hundreds of millions of people. And it's extremely important to highlight that we looked at several types of hydropower, such as reservoir, pump storage, and runoff river. And we see an important growth of reservoir hydropower, or dams, as Eddie mentioned, in terms of providing these multiple services and export opportunities that is also mentioned by the example of Itaipu. The need for flexibility stimulates also a strong growth of pumped hydropower, not only in markets of developed countries, but it's also in emerging economies. It is very important to highlight the role of the public sector. Hydropower development is nothing similar to wind and solar PV in terms of the project size, in terms of the civil works that is involved, in terms of the permitting and the length of permitting. It's a different technology, and it has to be recognized as a different technology in that sense. we see that in the coming 10 years, as in the last 2 decades, public sector role of developing hydropower, of the owning of the hydropower remains significantly high, especially for large-scale projects. But the private sector, which remains extremely important to develop these projects as well, is only involved in developing smaller projects. Because larger projects require a huge investment cost, they are risky. That's why public sector's involvement is important. However, there are countries in the world where the policy schemes or policy incentives are in a good shape and providing enough de-risking of the hydropower large-scale projects. We see there the involvement of the private sector. So it is important to actually increase the role of the private sector in hydropower development in order to attract the necessary financing to develop projects. Unfortunately, as I mentioned in the beginning of my talk, the policy is extremely important, and the policy attention to hydropower has been extremely low compared to other technologies. One part is that the involvement of the public sector is there. Obviously, it's very important, but policies remain key in developing hydropower. Otherwise, it is very difficult to make a case for hydropower projects without policy support, such as policies targeting electricity sales or policies targeting investment costs. Without long-term contracts provided to hydropower, as also in wind and solar projects, it is very difficult to de-risk the hydropower projects and make them bankable. The policies is not also limited to these kind of incentives or the purchase agreements. It is also important to provide a framework, a clear framework for sustainability, for permitting, for environmental assessment. It remains key to develop those in order to de-risk large-scale projects to become operational in a sustainable manner. We talk about flexibility in the markets, which is becoming more and more important. And hydropower actually is one of the best technology to provide this flexibility. In both startup time, providing minimum load, and ramp rates which are needed to ramp up and down the power systems because of wind and solar PV penetration is extremely important. And it will become even more important in the coming decades. And considering the role of hydropower providing those, we need hydropower, large-scale hydropower projects, which are actually the cheapest way of providing this flexibility today, significantly cheaper than battery storage in terms of large and long-term storage durations. It's also cheaper currently at the reservoir level, providing this flexibility rather than gas. And it is a clean power flexibility. And we will need more and more renewable energy dispatchable technologies in the future to decarbonize the electricity generation globally, but also providing flexibility at the same time. We looked at the IEA for the first time the potential of this flexibility, which is extremely critical, as I said, for the development of wind and solar PV in the future. And we talk about batteries to provide the storage. When you include every single battery pack that is installed all around the world, including electric vehicles, when you compare it, pump storage, and even for the reservoir hydropower storage capabilities, they remain minuscule. When we talk about storage, we need to talk about hydropower. That is extremely important to recognize their role to provide this flexibility and storage capabilities all around the world today or also in the future. One important point that is coming to slowly to all these countries is the modernization. At the IEA, we see the modernization not only important for the water management, but also important to create an enabling environment to maximize the flexibility of hydropower. In our forecast in the coming 10 years, we expect that 20% of the global fleet will be 55 years and older, which means that they will need to go through major refurbishment in order to operate, first of all, provide clean energy that they've been providing in a reliable way. That's the first point. But also the second point is to modernize them and making the generation much more flexible. However, when we compare the need for modernization investment versus what we see, what is going on in the market, there's a big disconnect. The developers are delaying their investments because there are not enough policies, there is not enough market condition to make this huge investment to modernize the fleet in order to make it more flexible. According to our forecast, these investments need to double in order to be in line with the flexibility needs of the power system. And when we compare this growth of we see in the main case versus we also have an accelerated case where we look at the policy improvements, market design improvements, streamlined permitting, and increasing affordable financing that can lead actually the higher growth of hydropower in this case. Because there are a lot of projects who are waiting financing to be commissioned, which we did not include in our main case, but they are included in the accelerated case if they achieve quick permitting and they can basically get commissioned and with the financing, affordable financing. However, addressing challenges is only one part of the story. We have another important story to tell, is our targets. In the coming decade, we need to almost double the hydropower capacity that we need to install in the coming 10 years towards 2030. We are far away even in the accelerated case, which requires not only addressing challenges that I mentioned, but also raising the ambition. Without this, it will be very difficult to be on track with the net zero goals that is currently discussed in Glasgow. Even beyond 2030, we need further acceleration towards 2050 to be in line. And in this other 2 decades that we will see, the hydropower capacity growth need to double again. And in order to do that, obviously, not only we need the existing projects, but we need to tap the potential in a sustainable manner in the coming years. That's why IEA's policy suggestions, the first one, and probably the most important one to policymakers, to all the policymakers in the world, is to move hydropower up in the energy and climate agenda. We are hoping that policymakers make hydropower in the new agenda of the policy, adding up to several other topics such as wind, solar PV, and other dispatchable technologies. The second most important one is the sustainable standards. As I mentioned by Eddie, there is no hydropower without sustainable standards. And we really welcome their initiative in terms of developing these rules and regulations and framework for policymakers. The rules are needed, but they need to be clear and to respect certain timelines in order for investors to be able to invest in hydropower. We need to recognize the critical role of hydropower in electricity security in the world to avoid that is an electricity system that is operating in a secure and cost-effective manner. We need more flexibility. We need to, in order to do that, we need to incentivize modernization, but also build more on what we have, especially in terms of pumped hydro storage. We need to mobilize affordable financing to develop hydropower in the developing economies where it is mostly needed in a cost-effective, reliable, and cheap power. And last but not least, we need to price in the multiple public benefits of hydropower, such as water management, irrigation, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much for your attention, and I leave it there, Tom. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Armin. With that, we have a a thorough review of the trends in hydropower, the role they play, the investment challenges ahead of us, and some policy recommendations.
You are muted, Tom.
A good classic presentation of what the IEA delivers in terms of its analysis, if I may say so. Next, I turn to Alex Campbell, also from the International Hydropower Association, to give us his view and analysis.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, everybody, for attending today. Just wait for the slides to come up. Looks like they're there. Moving them through. Thank you. Yes, so I'm going to touch on, we'll really build on what Jaime was talking about to really help set the scene for why we need hydropower, but also crucially, some of the reasons why it's not been built at the rate that we think, the IEA thinks, IRENA thinks that it should be built at. So I'll kick off just with a brief reminder. I'm sure many of you know the different types of hydropower, but works on a very simple principle. The power of water turns an electricity turbine, generates electricity. Much like a wind power creates electricity through turning a generator. It's very simple, been going for 100 years. The image at the top is a run-of-river hydropower site, so pretty straightforward, doesn't require impounding a large reservoir. The one we're much more familiar with is reservoir or impoundment hydropower, the image at the bottom there, which can require flooding quite a large area. But the great benefit of that, of course, is that you have huge amounts of storage, and you saw that from Jaime's presentation just now. Perhaps one of the more exciting newer technologies is pumped storage hydropower. This is perhaps slightly counterintuitive. At times of low electricity prices and low demand, you pump water up a hill, and then at times of high demand, you release it. So that's obviously got some fantastic synergies with things like solar and wind, where you might have to curtail excess renewable electricity otherwise. So really excited about pumped storage hydropower. There's a lot of it in the world at the moment, but we do need more. And then just a last small comment. We're very familiar talking about dams and associating dams with hydropower. But in fact, the majority of the world's large dams even are not used for hydropower. As Eddie touched on earlier, we could power those and actually use them to generate electricity with quite a low environmental impact. There's all sorts of reasons why that isn't happening at the scale that's needed, and I'll be happy to talk about those later. But just a reminder, not all dams by any means are used for hydropower. So Jaime's already talked a little bit about the growth in recent years with China leading the way. And this chart hopefully shows you quite clearly. It's from our hydropower status report that we publish each year. You can see that China has, I can't do the maths quickly enough in my head, around a quarter of the world's hydropower fleet. So 1,330 gigawatts in total, we think. As you'd expect, the major leaders there are the big countries which have the right geography for it. But crucially, we're not seeing enough growth, and I'll come on to some of the reasons for that in a moment. Sorry, I'm just going to jump back one. Just that last stat at the top, I think it was mentioned previously, but I just want to reiterate it. At the moment, hydropower generates around 17% of the world's electricity. It's a huge amount. It's more than all the other renewables combined at the moment. But if you say to most people, name a renewable, I suspect, other than maybe not in this audience, but outside, they wouldn't necessarily talk about hydropower. So just to build on why it's so important in the future, this chart is from IRENA. IEA, of course, do very similar ones. And I don't know if you were watching the WWF presentation earlier, they actually had a very similar one. What it shows, and the crucial thing here is the sheer increase in the amount of electricity generating capacity we need if we're going to get to net zero. Even if we're not going to get to that 1.5 degree net zero target, the less challenging 2 degree target, that chart on the right is still significantly higher. It's well over 20,000 gigawatts. And the really important thing to note here is that hydropower shifts from being an important provider of electricity to being the dominant source of flexible electricity. And I'll explain on the next slide quite why that's so important. And as we've heard from Jaime, we need 850 gigawatts plus if we're to hit 2 degrees, and significantly more if we're to hit 1.5 degrees, because the other options just aren't really there at the moment. Let's make sure I'm clicking in the right place. Right, I will explain why the other options aren't quite there at the moment. Some of the talks earlier were talking about comparing hydropower with solar. Now, solar is a fantastic technology, low carbon electricity, it's brilliant. Problem is, at night, you don't get much solar. So if you want to have electricity on demand, you need to have the right suite of tools to do that. We don't think fossil fuels are an alternative. We crunched some numbers. We said, if we replace that 850 gigawatts of hydropower with coal, for example, what would the equivalent emissions be? And it's approximately equivalent to India's emissions today. If you went to the more climate-friendly gas, then that would come down. It would be approximately equivalent to the emissions of Japan today. So the world's second largest population, second most populous nation, or the third largest economy. Completely incompatible, obviously, with tackling climate change. So what are the other tools that we might have available to us? Lithium-ion batteries are a fantastic technology on grids. They are really, really important. They will be increasingly important, especially for those short-term instant grid services. Once you start to get above 4 hours or so, they become less cost-effective. And as you can see from this chart, which we published recently at the International Forum of Pumpstorage Hydropower, Pumpstorage hydropower is far more cost-effective over those longer durations. And that's not even comparing it with regular reservoir hydropower, which is even more cost-effective again. So what about some of the other options? Carbon capture and storage. We're obviously going to need some of that in the grids of the future. It's yet to be deployed at scale. Can we bank on that coming through in the timeframes that we need? I suspect not. I mean, there may be other people who challenge that, but we've yet to see it being deployed at scale around the world. Green hydrogen is going to be fantastically important, and we strongly at the IHA really support the deployment of green hydrogen as quickly as possible. But its priority has to be in those hard-to-abate sectors. So that will be things like high-quality heat in industrial processes, maybe heavy vehicles, shipping, that sort of thing. Using it in the electricity sector must come lower down the priority list. And there's a huge task to be done with deploying green hydrogen at scale, and we want to play a part in helping that. And then last but not least, let's not forget some of the other more dispatchable, more readily available renewable technologies. Nuclear power, it's not renewable, but low carbon. If you go back to the charts we were talking about with the IEA or ARENA, they are already pushing nuclear to the max. We are already pushing biofuels to the max. Those will have a part to play, don't get me wrong, but if you take hydropower out of the mix, you make that really, really difficult planning and deployment that much more difficult, that much more expensive. So good question that we get asked is, well, you say 850 gigawatts or you say even more, where's that going to come from? Aren't we already using a large proportion of the world's resources? And it's certainly true in areas like Europe that a lot of the deployable resource has been put into service. However, we did a literature review of the academic literature out there on the available hydropower resource. This, by the way, is all available in His Excellency mentioned it earlier, our Hydropower 2050 report. What we see is that even if you apply quite serious technical, economic, and environmental constraints, there is more than enough potential capacity still there to help us hit those targets. Now, there will be debates about a lot of those, of course, and not all the theoretically available hydropower resource should be used. We totally understand that, but there is still a huge amount that can be used, and we've seen the scale of the challenge that we need to tackle climate change. We're going to have to use some of it. And this, by the way, isn't including the potential for pumped storage hydropower. Sorry about the quality of the chart there. That's from our friends at the Australian National University. I take responsibility for the quality of the chart, though, I should just say that. They mapped out the potential for off-river pumped storage hydropower around the world, and it is absolutely vast. There is more than enough to go around, but we need the willpower to actually start getting it built. Just to put those numbers in a slightly different format, we looked at what was in the pipeline. So again, I go back to that 850 gigawatt figure. We looked at what's under construction around the world. There's only around 150, 160 gigawatts of hydropower currently under construction. There's several hundred more in the pipeline, so this might be stuff that has been approved but isn't being built for various reasons, or is going through approval, or has just been announced. What is clear, as you can see there, is that there is a gap. There is a gap between what is being built, what is being talked about being built, and what actually needs to be built. So we really need urgent action. Hydropower's long timelines, we know that and we recognize that, but if you want to do it sustainably and do it properly, you need to start building for it now. Now, we've got a set of recommendations as well. They're very similar to the IEAs, and we totally 100% support the IEAs, so I won't go into these in a huge amount of detail. Perhaps just the first one there, planning. If you want to have low-carbon grids in the future, yes, deploy wind and solar at scale now, but you also need to think about what happens when they're not generating. How do you back them up? If you do the planning now, you can get the low-cost, sustainable, low-carbon solutions in place. It's really important. I'll be very happy afterwards. I'm conscious of time if people want to talk through any of those other ones to go through them. So just a final slide from me. Hydropower is today and tomorrow an extremely essential provider of low-carbon, flexible electricity. It can and should be developed sustainably. Eddie mentioned earlier the hydropower sustainability tools and the standard. There's no excuse deploying through to 2050 for not deploying hydropower sustainably, but urgent action is needed to make sure that hydropower plays its role, its essential role in tackling climate change. So with that, I'll leave you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alex. Well, now that we've thrown such a wealth of knowledge and data and information at you, we have even a greater number of experts still here on a panel session now. And so now I'll turn to our panelists, and I'll introduce you individually, but I would ask you to keep your interventions to 5 minutes. And these panelists will now give us their expert advice on particular aspects of the development and exploitation of hydropower. First, I turn to Mr. Ariel Schaefer da Silva, from the head of the Environmental Management at Itaipu, Binacional, Brazil. Please.
Thank you very much. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I thank the Taj government and also the International Hydropower Association for inviting us to participate here. And what I'd like to bring here is how do we solve some problems that we have in hydropower production. And as our partner from Paraguay said before, we have a long history. And Itaipu was planned since the beginning for sustainability. It's incredible how at 1973, some of the expertise that were contracted by Itaipu to plan the environmental issues and environmental impacts and study these impacts, how they did it in a format that today are using some of their modern concepts of environmental sustainability in terms of ecosystem services that they supply to us, and today ecosystem services are our partners in water security and energy security. So since the beginning, and this is a very important thing to think, that we have to plan hydropower plants since the beginning and think about environmental costs, environmental impacts, and environmental benefits that we can bring doing something. Just to talk about environmental benefits, Itaipu, when it was implemented, 73% of Brazilian margin territory, because it's a binational company, the border of Brazil and Paraguay. In Brazil, 70% of the environment was degraded. The soil was occupied by production, mainly cattle production. And Itaipu had the advice from expertise that we should rebuild it, the ecosystems around the reservoir. Today you have, as I said before, the biggest and the more structured forest around the reservoir in Brazil. And we have 24 million trees planted, monitored, and today you have return of fauna and other native flora. So we have a new, we rebuilt the environment, and we are connecting national parks in Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay with by our border. So it's a very important thing. And why it was good for Itaipu? One of the big problems, the biggest problems for Itaipu was sedimentation. The lifespan of the reservoir can be reduced drastically if we don't work with the territory and the environmental territorial management approach. So we have watershed basin approach. We help people in the territory and the government and partners to rebuild ecosystem infrastructure, the green infrastructure of the region. And we also help them to manage soil and manage production. And then we have a return of some of the water production in the region. 18% of the water produced in the region, water used by Itaipu, is produced in approximately 240 municipalities around Itaipu in Brazil and Paraguay. So we are managing this region to have increase of this water production in the region. That's ecosystem service that regulate climate also, and also water production. And then we have all this work together in Brazil and Paraguay doing the same thing with different programs sometimes because of different conditions of the companies, of the countries. We are doing this very large partnerships with communities, municipalities to manage this big environment and have the reduction of sedimentation in the reservoir. With this, we can increase lifespan and don't lose money in the future or energy production in our case. And we are today not a company that are only energy generator. We are a company that we are committed to sustainable development in the region. We cannot detach anymore water production, energy production, water management, and also sustainable development in the region. Everything is connected. It's part of our business. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So yet again, great details of a fascinating, well, case study for us, but a very good example of combining, as you say, the energy resource, the water resource, and the sustainable development. Very good. So for next, I turn to another expert, Mr. Mark Smith, who's Director General of the International Water Management Institute, for another perspective from an international organization.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the IHA and the IEA for organizing this event, and the Republic of Tajikistan, which facilitated my invitation to it, so thank you very much. One reflection, sorry, this is a tangential reflection, but it's so enjoyable to be sitting here before an actual audience and being able to speak to actual people. And I realize that it's the first time I've done that since last year, so very good to be with you. The perspective I bring is not one of someone who's an expert in hydropower. I'm not. I work on water management and water resources and on systems and how we navigate complex systems and change in complex systems through practical means of good practice, but also good policy, and how we bring science to bear on that. So the perspective I wanted to share with you was about how do we tackle this, the challenge that we're in and that hydropower is part of, where we're trying to pursue multiple goals. We're working in systems, and the hydropower and the energy system within which we're working is a coupled system with a set of other systems, and that coupling is getting tighter and tighter. And that's one of the things that events like the climate negotiations are trying to unravel and trying to find a way through. But alongside that are objectives to do with food systems, to do with biodiversity, to do with water security more generally, the health of rivers, as I think was being spoken about already today. So sustainability, of which one of the things that we're talking about today, is fundamentally, therefore, a multi-criteria problem. So where does hydropower fit within that? Well, one of the things that we have to grapple with, therefore, is trade-offs. So as we develop hydropower, what do we need to give up? How do we need to navigate that so we can give up less? How do we find that balance? How do we weigh those things? And people have been touching upon all those issues as we've been speaking today. But society needs to be equipped with the means to make those choices. So we need to be able to, in effect, optimize a set of really complex choices in systems that are getting more and more tightly coupled. So it's a really difficult problem we're in the middle of. And what does this take? Well, it takes being able to do a better job at mitigating the social and environmental costs of hydropower. It takes being able to undertake basin planning and optimize these trade-offs and not work project by project. It takes being able to integrate within what we're doing flow allocation and environmental flows. It takes the ability to introduce transparency in the way we do that, to have the institutions that are capable of performing these and facilitating these complex choices. So we need more sophisticated tools, we need more data, and that's where the good news is. The good news about how we can find our way through some of these complexities. So I've been working over the last several years with a consortium of partners from the University of Manchester, from IUCN, from my own organization, the International Water Management Institute. Now that group works under the title of Future Dams. In the past, we worked under a project called Wise Up to Climate. And we've been working with some really innovative tools to help with this system scale planning of water and energy systems, and ways in which you can quantify the trade-offs across the water, energy, food, and ecosystems nexus, so that societies can start making these informed choices. And these are, I think, going to be critical tools as we weigh a set of the dilemmas that we've been seeing on the screen today, and we integrate into that, how do you tackle climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and climate resilience alongside all those things? And there's some really good examples of doing that, for example, from Ghana, which provide sophisticated analytical approaches to how do you balance across the different parts of the energy system, which we've been hearing about, and identify and manage the trade, identify and see the good set of options, a better set of options for the kind of trade-offs that you need to consider with ecosystem health, with agriculture, and so on. So that's the good news, and that research continues. And I think those tools will serve the kinds of problems that we've been hearing about, the kinds of ambitions that we've been hearing about well, with and helping to make sure that hydropower, as it's developed, can do a good job of fitting in with these broader systems. Now, I want to just close with one question to you, because the thing I haven't heard anything about, and perhaps those of you who are hydropower experts, which I said I'm not, will have insight into. One of the things climate change means is that hydrology is changing. And so the fuel for hydropower and its reliability is changing, and in ways that are uncertain and unknown. So I'm interested in how the industry is looking at that problem and how it integrates it into these ambitions that you've been showing us today. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Mark. So that's an overarching framework for how to tackle all the different dimensions that we've been hearing about in a systems approach. Thank you. Now we turn to our third panelist, who's joining us remotely. And here we have, let me find my notes, it's Mr. Kenzo Hiroki. He's the coordinator of the high-level experts and leaders panel on water and disasters. Please, you can tell us how we're going to avoid disasters in water management.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon from Tokyo. Actually, in advance, the organizer have asked the panelists 3 questions. So let me talk in the form of answering those questions. The first question is, why do we need to develop hydropower? Very basic question. But answer has to be said in a way that is understandable by the leaders, politicians, and general public, rather than the those people within the water box and hydropower box. For me, there are 2 key parts of the answer. One of them is, yes, we need to develop the hydropower to make nobody left behind. Currently, the countries and leaders are bound by 2 responsibilities. One, to keep reducing the carbon emission to the zero emission society. To do that, we are discussing that. But at the same time, the leaders are bound to take the responsibility of keeping sustainable growth, sustainable development towards achievement of the SDGs. So the leaders and countries have to fulfill those two responsibilities at the same time. How? The important thing is that hydropower is sustaining the people's lives and livelihoods. And to make no one left behind. So because the geographical, geological, and environmental situation are different in each of the countries, the leaders may have to choose the most appropriate technologies and ways of the renewable energy. You cannot construct hydropower in at all small developing island countries. You cannot have a tidal wave power plant in a landlocked country. So you cannot put a lot of solar power in the mountainous areas. So there are certain countries like Central Asia that needs to develop and rely on hydropower to a large extent. That is one point we should not forget, to keep people not left behind from their development. And the second point of the answer is that the leaders and countries should not only mitigate climate change, but also to adapt to climate change. Obviously, solar power cannot help the flood to be mitigated, to be reduced. Actually, the water-related disasters are 95% of all disasters in terms of the number of the people. And also, water-related disasters are 70% of all the economic loss, which is amounting to over 20 trillion US dollars in the recent 20 years. So the hydropower is the only renewable energy energy scheme which can both mitigate the climate change and also adapt to climate change if they have a reservoir together with them. So hydropower is in a unique position, not only to mitigate, but also to adapt to climate change. So those are the two key answers to be given to the leaders and countries so that they are convinced that hydropower is a must for their sustainable development. The second question the organizer has asked is that how can we make hydropower environmentally more friendly and sustainable? My answer is that the environment, environment is just one. We do not have the, say, transport environment. We do not have the agriculture environment. We do not have the hydropower environment. Environment around us is just one. That means that, rather than sticking to, say, environmental assessment for the certain hydropower project, we have to look around us and coordinate with all other sectors who are concerned with the environment so that we build together and discuss together how our environment in the country, in the field, in the region can be better with all the actions and plans of the other projects, including hydropower project. That is my answer to the second question. The third question is how could we get more financial sources for hydropower development? Of course, there can be a lot of answers to these questions, but my answer is that try multi-purpose reservoir. Because, for example, disaster prevention is a responsibility of the government. So the money has to come from the taxpayer. In the case of the ODA, the money has to be grant rather than loan. So in that sense, by adding the hydropower scheme with the other purposes, like irrigation or the disaster risk reduction, you can raise more resources, including the grants and the public money, so that the hydropower plant creation is much easier. At the same time, probably this is relating to the question that my previous speaker has talked, is the development and progress of the study and research on the climate change. Because of the climate change discussion, the researches on the weather's climates have progressed enormously in super speed. Nowadays, it became possible to predict very accurately how much rain will come tomorrow or in a week. In that sense, the operation of the hydropower or any reservoirs which have been thought impossible in the decades back have become possible. That means that discharge water beforehand and receiving raining water tomorrow and in a week. That means operation of the reservoir much more easy and efficient. And that will create billions of dollars in total by just adding a small observation stations and computers and super data, a huge data, but from the climate change research laboratories. That is the one thing the hydropower and other water-related sectors can consider for the future to make more money out of the project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hiroki. So there, we've thrown a lot of data at you, and you've digested it all, and you've understood immediately all the points that the experts have made. So now we turn the floor over to you. If there are any questions from the audience, particular burning questions. Yes, please.
Thanks. Tyler Harlan from Loyola Marymount University. It's actually kind of building on Dr. Hiroki's comment, and also, Mark, the question that you asked at the end, which is threats of climate change to hydropower operations. Dr. Hiroki, you mentioned weather stations that can accurately predict weather in the next week. I guess I'm thinking a little more long-term about potential for droughts and how curtailment can be avoided, but also how to manage other services that dams provide, such as drinking water provision, irrigation provision, so that those aren't put by the wayside so that power continue to be generated. Thanks.
Who would like to have a first answer to that question, please?
Thank you. I don't know. Yeah, it's on. Thank you. So, great questions. In the hydropower sector, we've worked with our partners at the World Bank and the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development to do a climate resilience guide for hydropower, which is a detailed kind of guide for practitioners, step by step, how to build resilient projects, both greenfield, new build, but also if you're doing modernization to the existing fleet. But I'll also call attention to the IEA's excellent work in this area. They've done some really detailed modeling and analysis of the impacts of climate change on hydropower in various parts of the world. I know there was one on Africa within the last couple of years, which really shows in quite a lot of detail how different river basins will react in different ways. In some places, we'll have more water, and others less. And obviously, planners need to factor that into their long-term systems planning, because hydropower as an asset lasts for decades and decades and decades. But of course, and I'm going to say this, it's not unique to hydropower. All types of infrastructure, even winter, but we've seen wind in Europe this year has been unusually, I don't know what the word is for slow wind, maybe slow or less blowy than it normally is. And there are always climatic variations. But the key, I think, is building in the proper resilience now, looking at that best-in-class science to really understand what the impacts will be. And then if you can bring in those multiple uses, we strongly support that for hydropower, and it's a question of the owners, the operators, and the governments to work out what they want to use it for, when, what to prioritize, and how to do it.
Thank you. Other responses from the panel?
If I may.
I can complement. We are working with two kind of approach in Itaipu. It's our case that's a constructed dam already, and how we are going to manage it in long run to avoid climate impacts and the risk that we are suffering or can be exposed in the future. And one of them is to adapt with gray technology, gray infrastructure, rebuilding some systems or retrofitting some system, making some technological update in the dam to get better use of the water, and that we do very, very well now, but we can modernize it and have better results. And another thing is the green infrastructure that we can put together, but and we are doing that for many years to help the nature produce local water and have more resilience. And but we have to think about not only our region that I explained before, that are 240 municipalities in the region around us in Brazil and Paraguay, but only in Brazil, upstream the reservoir of Itaipu, there are 170 reservoirs, many for water supply and many for energy supply. And all this green infrastructure have to be planned in the whole river system, not only in our river system, our place or our region. So we have to plan in a broader, have to have a broader plan to implement. And these natural-based solutions are very cheap. They are cheaper, at least, than the gray solutions, and they are lasting. So this is a very important thing that we could do in the future, is work together with the other companies, water and energy companies, to do it together.
Great, thank you. Dr. Hiroki, did you want to come back on that?
Yes, for this, what I want to say is that the technology is already there. We can do that. We can consider climate change in the future that will be taken into account, reverse operation of the dams. The important thing is that the operators are very, very careful in changing such operation, because the mistake means the millions of dollars for them. So in the case of Japan, for example, the Japanese government has revised their law of their water management. When they decide that the flood is coming and the amount is decided, they asked the hydropower operators to discharge beforehand. And if the estimation was wrong and then the dam remains empty, the government compensates the amount to the hydropower operator. By doing, by changing such a, rule in association with the financial scheme, the operators can make one step forward. And at the same time, the threshold of the operation can become a bit broader and broader based on the experiences. And that experiences can be shared with the international community so that others can learn from that. So we need some step-by-step approaches so that the operators and water managers are confident enough to change their own water operation. That will make everybody happy. Win-win situation. Thank you.
Thank you. We want to make everybody happy. I would just add to that at the end to say that, yes, the IEA has done some analysis on this recently. We published a report on climate change impacts on hydro resources in Latin America, and we're currently working on a similar publication looking at hydro resources in South and Southeast Asia. So that's a growing body of work. Thank you. Are there other questions from the floor? Yes, please.
Thank you. Heike Drölisch, I'm with Countercurrent. There's one issue which I just don't understand, and that is the classification of hydropower as low carbon, because we all know that hydropower, especially when it has large reservoirs and especially when it's in tropical regions, emits substantial amounts of methane. But then when you look at the chemical formula for methane, it's CH4. So it's also carbon. And we all know that methane is has a lot stronger climate impact than carbon dioxide has, especially within the next 25 years, which are those decades where most urgent action is needed to prevent all kinds of tipping points. And I know the IHA is converting this to a 100-year lifetime compared to carbon dioxide. But actually, these 25 years are most crucial, and the impact of methane is, 83 times stronger than carbon dioxide. So I wonder also why IEA is classifying this as low carbon, and I think the person is not there anymore, but wanted to raise this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure there's a good answer, and given that there was the methane pledge made yesterday, we pass to Alex for the answer.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's a really important question. So when you flood, for those who aren't aware, and apologies if you do know, when you flood an area, there's organic material in the ground which breaks down, and under certain conditions, it can release methane. That happens whether it's for hydropower or any other reason. So we've done peer-reviewed studies. The IPCC previously has done peer-reviewed studies and looked at the median emissions, lifetime emissions for hydropower are around 23, 24 grams per kilowatt hour. I think I've got that reference correct. To put that in context, nuclear and wind is around 12, solar is around 40, low 40s, and fossil fuels are in the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. The problem with hydropower, and I think the questionnaire touched on it, is it's got a very wide range, and in the wrong place at the wrong time, it can lead to very significant emissions. In the right place at the right time, it can actually be a carbon sink. It's really dependent on the site and the location, which is why we've got tools. We've worked with UNESCO and the World Bank to develop a tool called GRES, which is open access. People can use they put in the appropriate parameters to work out the emissions for a given reservoir. Like I say, it's not specific to hydropower. It's a problem with reservoirs more generally. But like I say, the evidence is out there. It's peer reviewed. The IPCC has used it as well. They've done their own studies. The median emissions are extremely comparable with other forms of renewables, and I appreciate that not everybody agrees with that, but that's where we see the evidence taking us.
Thanks very much. So, indeed, applying Mark Smith's idea of the systems framework and creating a regime where all these different considerations can be brought into the analysis is the way to just identify it, measure it, and address it. Thank you. Have we any other questions from the floor? If not, I will take. Was that a hand raised? No. In that case, I will take the moderator's privilege and ask my own question, which is that from all your experience, we want to benefit from having you all here in person. Very nice. If there's one thing that you've encountered when it's managing the environmental aspects of hydro resources, in developing a systems framework, in analyzing the hydro industry, what's a common problem that you've encountered that is an issue for practitioners in the world today, and what is the solution that you found to address that problem? If you'd like to start.
Thank you. Well, I mentioned before already that the sedimentation problem that we solved with the ecosystem approach. So we adopted the ecosystem approach and conservation approach to avoid sedimentation. But there are other issues that we can work with. Also, water quality. When you think about hydropower, you think water quality is not a big problem. It's a problem for the users of the water, but not for the company. But it is. It is. Invasive species can cause very big damages to hydropower plants, and other than the problems that they cause for the environment and for the people, but also they one species, for instance, that is an invasive species from Europe that is in South America. Degraded concrete is relative to the anemone from the sea anemone. So this small animal, small invertebrate, can degrade concrete and cause many big problems and big investments to companies. So we have to work also with water quality. And water quality, you work territorially, not only inside the gates of the company or just doing something in the reservoir and monitoring the reservoir. You have to talk to people that use the water around and that dispose garbage and dispose chemicals and everything. So you have to think broadly. Thank you.
The issue I would like to raise is about, I spoke before about the complexity of issues. So how do we tackle that? And the key is institutions that are capable of doing so and capable of working with this kind of complexity. So as we go forward, there's a lot of lessons to learn about which institutions, which construct of different institutions are able best to manage all of these competing interests. So let's learn from those examples. I've visited Itaipu and learned a lot there, and I know it's a very innovative institution, not just in terms of technology, but also in terms of the setup of the institution and the way it engages with the surrounding region. So let's learn from these kinds of examples and recognize that to move forward with the kinds of solutions, the kinds of solution trajectories that we've been putting on the table in this session, we need the ability to help societies make these choices. So good institutions informed by more data and good processes of bringing people in transparent decision making is what I would like to see.
So I'd draw attention to the issue of securing private sector investment into hydropower and indeed other forms of low carbon infrastructure. Investors, when they're putting up a lot of money that needs to be paid back over a long period of time, they need to have a degree of certainty. We need to apportion risk in the right place. They should take the risk for building things and making sure that they work, but they need to be sure they're going to get a revenue stream. We've seen fantastic success in deploying solar and wind because of those mechanisms. There are mechanisms put in place by governments to ensure that an investor knows that his or her company will get a return on their investment. With hydropower, we saw it earlier from Jaime's presentation, the private sector funding isn't really there, and that's in part because the mechanisms aren't quite right for hydropower at the moment. We have seen some successes around the world, but there's not enough of them. So let's focus on getting some new, innovative revenue certainty and guaranteeing mechanisms in place, and then the billions of dollars of private money that's out there that we keep hearing about will come into the sector, much as it will for all those others.
Thank you. Dr. Hiroki, would you like to come back on this?
Yes, our big challenge recently was how to deal with the COVID-19, because the COVID-19 doesn't wait for us to address the disasters first. It comes together. So having dealt with, to some extent, the COVID-19 issues, so we had started a discussion on how we can change our own society to more resilient and adaptive ones. Because now we learn that we will have more disturbances in a larger scale in the future. That means that our societal system is not prepared for that. It's the same for hydropower sector, for the water management sector, for agriculture. Everybody has to confront that from tomorrow. So we do not have the system and methodology to deal with such large-scale disturbances and the slow onset, but continuous changes like climate change. So for that, all the sectors have to discuss together, probably in the UN. That is what we are, having a discussion right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, on that note, I see no further hands, then I will bring the session to a close. And I think we've had a wonderful, fast ride through everything you wanted to know about hydropower, but were afraid to ask. We've heard of great regional development of hydropower in Tajikistan, where it's a regional resource for balancing systems, for supporting the further integration of renewables into regional electricity systems. We've heard of a system in Latin America where the management of the water resource, the energy resource, and the environmental resource is apparently a virtuous case study of excellence, and we should all travel to South America to see this wonderful example. And we've gone through a lot of data, exploring the current trends and the major investment needs, and we came back on that point at the end. The investment needs, and it's a story you'll hear for every clean energy technology as we talk through the clean energy transition. The investment challenges are major. It's a challenge for the IFIs who are gathered here at COP today. It's a challenge for the world leaders gathered at COP, and really something that needs to be addressed in the course of these 2 weeks. But with that kind of investment, for other elements, I feel today we've flagged up that there are issues that need addressing and things that are seen by some as problems, but we have experts around the table who have solutions. And certainly, again, wearing my advertising hat, the International Energy Agency is about giving clear messages of how we can actually get to net zero, the technologies we need, the investments we need to make, but also the policies and the measures and the recommendations to governments that can help us get there. So I think that's an optimistic note to end on. I would thank our speakers, I would thank our panelists very much for joining in today. Thank you for attending, and I hope you learned something and feel a bit more optimistic about the future of hydropower. Thank you very much indeed.